Bună dimineața. My only Romanian words. Thank you very much for your introduction. I couldn't understand it, but I suppose that it was all okay. So thank you very much for inviting me here. Great people inside to talk about my favorite subject, which is actually work engagement. And what I would like to do is to tell you something about particularly the scientific background, because I have a kind of passion, which is to bring science to practice. So I'm going to strain your brain a little bit with scientific knowledge, so I hope you're ready after this tiring experience of a night before. So, I'm affiliated at two universities. One is in Leuven, as you can see here. The Belgians, they like life. They have the beer, of course. They have the French fries, which they think are Belgian fries, so they're always very angry when people say French fries. They know it's Belgian fries. And we have a lot of students there that drink beer and eat chocolate sometimes. And you see it's the old medieval town, a little bit like Russia. And the other town I'm working in is Utrecht, and we have flowers. And we have coffee shops where you cannot buy coffee, but all kind of other things. And we have also kennels. It's similar as Amsterdam. And next time you come to Holland, I suggest that you come to Utrecht as well, because Amsterdam is overcrowded, and well, Utrecht is just a nice, small provincial town which has the characteristics of Amsterdam. Okay, so what we're going to do today is to say something about work and engagement, more in a general sense. Why is engagement now important? What is it? But also, what is it not? Because there are a lot of, let's say, misunderstandings about that. Also, how often does it occur? How many people are engaged? In fact, how can we understand work engagement? What are the drivers? What are the consequences? And finally, last but not least, how to increase it, and I'll give you also a small case study about that. But let's first have a look at the nature of work. Basically, you can look at work from two different angles. And this is the traditional angle. This is Martin Luther. This is also the Christian work ethic, like man is a working animal, and work is associated with effort, strain, sacrifice, blood, sweat, and tears. So it's nothing very nice to do, actually. If you work hard, then you come in heaven. But first of all, you have to do all that difficult work. And it's a traditional view that's basically the stress discord. So work is associated with disease, disorder, damage, disability, burnout, all these negative things. But on the other hand, you also have a creative part of work. This is a picture of, I know it's a little bit tricky to show Karl Marx here in Romania, but Marx said a very important sentence, namely that in and through work, man becomes man. In und durch Arbeit. Which actually means that people change their personality, develop their skills when they work. So work is very important for your personal, professional development. So from that perspective, work is positive. It's engaging, energizing, enriching, and it's a positive thing. So therefore, work has two different kinds of meanings. And the interesting thing about psychology is that it's blind at one eye, so to speak. There are over 12,000 scientific peer-reviewed journal articles on job burnout and only 3,000 on work engagement. So you see that psychology is predominantly focused on the negative side of work. It has always been, actually. And let's have now a look at work. I will not go through this list step by step because you are all familiar with it. I want to make another point. But our world of working is changing. From a traditional to, let's say, a more modern variation. As you can see here, I guess you're all familiar with it. I'm not very knowledgeable about how things in Romania are, but this is, I guess, a kind of international trend. And what's the interesting thing is that we are moving to a situation where workers are, let's say, soft skills of workers, mental capital of workers, all kinds of psychological attitudes, behaviors become more and more important. I mean, when you work in a diverse team, for instance, you need to have certain kind of empathy. You need to know how to solve problems, to solve conflicts. So the psychological makeup becomes more and more important in modern work. So my thesis is actually that we are seeing now, we are witnessing now, what I would like to call a psychologization of work. So for modern organizations, it's the mental capital that is particularly important. It's not anymore like you have to be healthy, which means that, well, you're not sick, you're not at home, you're doing your job, and that's it. No, the current organizations really demand workers, a workforce that invests its mental capital in work. So this is the basic development, I think, that underlies the idea of work engagement. So what is actually work engagement? So when you want to study a phenomenon from a scientific point of view, you have to come up with some kind of definition, which is very clear. And this is our definition that is based on interviewing people, on questionnaire items, etc. That work engagement is a positive, effective motivational state, so it has to do with your feelings, with your affects, but also with your motivations, kind of driving force for your behavior. And it's characterized by vigor, which essentially means energy. People are engaged, they have a lot of energy. They continue also when things get different, they don't get tired very easily. Dedication, which actually refers to being very involved in your work, being enthusiastic, being proud, seeing work as a challenge. And finally, absorption. And absorption is to do with focus. So you're very focused on what you're doing, you forget everything around you, and you're just, so to speak, one with your work. You forget time, you forget to lunch, you forget everything around you, you just focus on what you do. So people who are energized, who are dedicated to their work, and who have focus, this is what we call engagement. To give you an idea how it looks like, I show you a small video clip. Can you please push the right button, and then you see the famous one and only rapping flight attendant here.
Next flight, 72 Oklahoma City. You guys with me? All right. So it's gonna be a stomp, clap. There you go. Keep that going. This is flight 372 on SWS. The flight attendant's on board serving you today. Teresa in the middle, David in the back. My name is David, and I'm here to tell you that. Thank you for the fact that I wasn't ignored. This is Southwest Airlines. Welcome aboard.
So I guess you all were in an airplane, but when you have a flight attendant like this, you never forget it, probably. This clip is actually a little bit longer. When you want to see the whole clip, you can actually find it on the internet, Working Flight Attendant. But the point I want to make here is this is an engaged guy. And why is he engaged? Because he tries to make his job more challenging, more interesting by using his particular signature skills. Of course, this guy is a rapper in his free time. And he came home and he thought, well, how can I do what I like and combine it with my work? And he did. When he has done this, would have done this 10, 15 years ago, he would probably be kicked out because he did not comply with the drill. He didn't do what the supervisor was expected him to do. And this very nicely illustrates how different the requirements are and how different we look at employees now compared to 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Actually, this is a success case because this flight attendant is working for Southwest Airlines, and they have a case study which is published in this book, and they claim that because they have a culture of promoting work engagement, they are successful, also financially, whereas other aircraft or other companies making losses. So there is also this connection between workers' behavior, engagement, and business performance, which is at least here very clear. One thing is you have to make a sharp definition of what engagement is, and it's important because this definition is the basis of the measurement instrument, and with this measurement instrument you can do research. So we developed the Utrecht work engagement scale, and you see here typically items like at my work I feel bursting with energy, vigor, dedication, enthusiastic about my work, and absorption, I'm immersed in my work. And meanwhile, this questionnaire is used in almost 90% of all academic research. It has been translated in 27 languages. We also found that there's a pretty high correlation, as you can see here, with, well, basically it should work. works there, but it doesn't work there. Okay, 0.60 here, which means that when you ask somebody else to assess the level of engagement of a focal person, it correlates pretty highly with what the person is reporting himself. So this is used for most scientific research. Now a little bit of psychological theory. Dan Hill yesterday also showed a similar kind of picture. This is the circumplex model of emotions, as it is called in psychology. Why is this? Because on the surface of that circle, you can plot all human emotions. And I have included a couple of examples, but there are of course more. And each and every emotion has a component of pleasure and displeasure, so it's positive or negative. That's pretty obvious. But each emotion also refers to a certain level of activation. So your system is activated, your blood pressure is going up, heart pressure, you are more vigilant, etc. So you have activated system or deactivation. And then when you cross these two dimensions, then you have four quadrants actually. And clearly, when I would ask you where is this rapid flight attendant, you would probably point to that direction. It is activated pleasurable state. So this person is activated and he has fun. This is very clear. On the opposite, we have people who are burned out. They are deactivated, they are tired, they feel depressed, they feel sad, and it's a very negative kind of feeling. And then two other quadrants are left, and these are also important because these I can use to discriminate between and engagement. With satisfaction. Satisfaction is of course positive, but people are satisfied are not very activated. So suppose this flight attendant would have been satisfied with the job, meaning that he came home and was smoking a cigar, drinking a glass of whiskey and saying, okay, do my job tomorrow, I'm satisfied with it. But obviously he was engaged, he had some extra energy and he wanted to make his job more challenging. So because of this activation. And then we have work addiction. And work addiction is a state where people are very activated, but they are activated in the wrong way. Because it's not pleasurable, it's not positive. I'll come to that a little bit later. In order to see, this is a wheel, and this is of course a theory, but we put this theory to a test. And what we did here is actually in Spanish employees, we had 4 different groups. 9 to 5 are the ones who are satisfied, then we have the engaged, the workaholic, and the burnout. And what we did here, we assessed the levels of energy, how energetic, the level of pleasure in the job, the level of challenge, how much challenge they would experience, how much skills they would use, and the amount of identification. How strong do they identify with their job? And what you see here is that, of course, the engaged, they score high on all variables. The burnout score low. They are opposites, you remember? So that's pretty clear. But the most interesting thing is look at the workaholics. They have a lot of energy, but they lack pleasure. So workaholics actually do not have so much fun at work. On the other hand, those who are satisfied, they have energy, they have pleasure, but they lack challenge. And challenge is that component that is related to activation. So they feel okay at work, but they are not activated at work. Which is a very important thing to do, because most, or at least in the past, most of the companies, they focus on employee satisfaction. And my idea is that instead of focusing on satisfaction, it's better to focus on engagement. Why? Of course, both are correlated, but if you look at the relation with with performance, then engagement is correlated much higher with performance, especially with extra role performance. So the kind of performance that is related to behavior that you're not expected to display. So in-role performance is just the job you have to do. Extra role performance is the extra things that you do in addition to what you're expected to do. And here you see that these correlations are much higher. So from the perspective of performance, it's much better to have engaged employees instead of satisfied employees. Now the difference between workaholism and work engagement. So basically, there are different types of motivations involved. People are work engaged, they are intrinsically motivated. They like their job, so they have an appetite for it. It's an approach motivation. Workaholics, they have an avoidance motivation. Of course, you think, what are they avoiding? Well, they are avoiding the negative emotions that are associated with not working. So when an employee, a workaholic, is not working, he feels restless, he feels guilty, he feels useless, and the only way to avoid these feelings is to go back work. So he works because he cannot do anything else but working. And this is a crucial difference. Also, we found that when you are having a secure attachment to your parents, when you were a child, then you're more likely to be later in life work engaged, whereas when you have an insecure attachment to your parents, you always want to prove that you are better and that you're worthwhile. And you need the performance for your self-evaluation, for your positive self-evaluation, and then you are a workaholic. So we see that there are major psychological differences between the two, although on the surface they might look the same. But the important thing is that workaholism is related to burnout, and workaholism is not. So it's better to be an engaged person than to be a workaholic person. Well, now I have a look at the prevalence of engagement. So how many people can we consider engaged? Well, for this I used data from the European Work and Conditions Survey in 2015. This was the latest one. And this questionnaire that I proposed before, which was work engagement scale, this was actually used in this survey. And what you see here, probably you don't see it, but here is the Netherlands. It's lonely at the top, so it's my country, so I'm most engaged. I was not involved actually. It was done at the European level. So, and here you see a map. And you can see that Romania is yellow, which actually means it's somewhere in the middle. And you see the green countries, they have high levels, the red ones have low levels. And actually Romania is in the middle. But you also see, and this is the point I want to make here, which I think is very important, you see, because this is a classification over there. It's saying, well, you are in the middle, you are good or you are bad. And Romania happens to be yellow. But the cutoff score was actually 4. So you see here that, where is it? France had 4, a score of 4, and Romania had 3.98, which is, well, it's almost the same, but you have to draw somewhere a line. And this is my problem when organizations are saying, well, we have 27% of engagement or 47% of engagement. You always should be very critical about where you draw the line, because I could have drawn the line a little bit different and then Romania would have been lead. So anyway, that's an important thing. What we also know is that engagement has nothing to do with, not so much actually the gender, education or type of contract or even the sector where you work. Like it's actually higher in the public sector than it is in the private sector. You probably wouldn't expect that. But it has particularly to do with the occupation. So higher occupations like managers, like teachers, like doctors, lawyers, they tend to have a higher level of engagement as blue-collar workers, which also makes sense. And industry also matters because healthcare, education, they score higher than, let's say, production industries. And of course, when you see that map of Europe, you immediately notice that there is also a kind of economic gradient. And what I did here is the level of engagement, which is at the y-axis, and the gross domestic product. And then you see this line. And you see at the bottom countries that are not so prosperous and have low levels of engagement. And at the top, you see the more prosperous level of the GDP. And the curve is actually flattening. And Romania is somewhere here at that corner. So again, a little bit in the middle. But interestingly, engagement at the country level is also related with less corruption, with more integrity, with more democracy, with more gender inequality, and with more individualism. So we have, we can actually say that in well-governed countries that are prosperous, level of engagement are higher. I mean, it's not really surprising, but it shows that engagement is a valid concept because it is showing an empirical pattern that you might actually expect. So how to understand engagement? What do we know about the drivers of engagement? And for that we use a model. It looks complicated, but actually it isn't. You see 3 columns. In the middle is the energy. I'm talking about engagement, not about burnout, so we can forget about that for the moment. And we have the work environment, which includes job resources. So these are aspects of the job that gives you actually energy. I'll give some examples right away. And you have job demands, which actually cost energy. They are effortful, stressful. And then we have leadership, personal resources, and we have 2 kind of outcomes. And basically talk about a motivational process, which says that when you have a resourceful job, then it leads to engagement, higher level of engagement, and then to positive outcomes. And when you have a job with a lot of stresses in it and with lacking resources, then you have low levels of energy and poor outcomes. And interesting, by the way, is this arrow. You don't see an arrow here from demands to engagement. So when you think about interventions and you want to increase engagement, then you'd rather increase the resources, and by doing so, at the same time, you decrease burnout. When you decrease your job demands, then yes, you decrease the level of burnout, but you don't increase the level of engagement. And the reason for that is by decreasing your demands, you also take away the challenge in the job. So the job is not so challenging anymore. There has to be some kind of stress, some kind of challenge, in order for people to feel engaged. So from an intervention perspective, this shows, and this is empirical. I mean, there is a lot of evidence for that. If you don't believe it, you can go to your library and look at it. But from the empirical work, we know that actually when you intervene in organizations, it's much better to focus on job resources than it is on job demands. So what do we know about the most important resources that have an effect in many, many studies on the level of engagement? These are resources in the social area, like support from your colleagues, from your boss, the climate in your team, the clarity of your role. Is it clear what you have to do and what are your responsibilities? And you get recognition, also from customers, also from your colleagues, and from your organization. And then there are some resources that have to do with your work, the content of your work. Do you have autonomy, control in your work? Does the work fit actually to what you can, your competences, and what you want, to your motivation? If this is the case, then it is kind of engaging. Using different kind of tasks, different kind of skills, having the adequate tools. Very often when we measure this is ICT tools that do not properly work, which is kind of frustrating, but when they do work, they are supportive, and participation in decision making. And on the level of the organizations, the communication, top down and bottom up. Do the managers, does the board know what's happening at the shop floor? Is there trust in management? Do people feel aligned? Do they know about the strategy and the mission of the organization? And do they feel that they contribute to it? If yes, then this is engaging. If no, this is frustrating. Is there a value congruence? So the personal values that I think are important, do they match with the values of the organization? Which often is actually not the case. And procedural justice. So the procedures that are followed concerning laying people off or promoting or distributing project or whatever, are they fair or are they not fair? And finally, resources that have to do with growth and development. Do I get performance feedback in time that I can use for improving? Do I have career possibilities? Let's say horizontal and vertical, and other possibilities for learning and development. So there are more, but these are the most important core resources that are related with engagement. But of course, as everything in psychology, it's always a matter of the environment and the person. So we also know that there are personal factors. Some people are more or less by nature or by way of their personality more likely to feel engaged. And this is the list of most important personal characteristics or personal resources that make people more likely to feel engaged. When you're emotionally stable and subverted, internal locus of control, meaning that I am the one who is in control, I'm in the driver's seat. It's not the outside forces, it's not God, it's not luck, it's me. Self-esteem, optimism, self-efficacy refers to the belief of I can do it, I can reach my goals. It's a yes, I can. And achievement striving, that you are a person that likes to achieve. So when you have all this, you are more or less blessed, then you are engaged. When you lack this, at the flip side, then you have a higher likelihood of feeling burnout. And then there is leadership, of course. Leadership is very important, as you all know, in organizations, and we were thinking also about a theoretical model, not for theory per se, but because the theory is very important and instrumental for knowing how things work, so that when you know how it works, you can actually also influence it. So that's the idea of the theory. And then we were reasoning, well, what kind of theory could be interesting for leadership? And then we came up with self-determination theory. And self-determination theory, one of the basic assets is that this theory assumes that there are a couple of basic psychological needs everybody has that need to be fulfilled in order to feel well, to perform well, and to function in an optimal way. And these basic needs are meaning. So everybody here in the room, everybody in the world wants to do meaningful activities. There's nobody starting in the morning digging a hole and then in the afternoon having all the soil back in the hole again. You don't do that. I mean, we even punish people to do meaningless work. I mean, this is a punishment. And then we have growth. Everybody likes to grow and to develop. If you have a toddler here and you would have him or her here on the stage, then spontaneously this creature would explore the environment, would learn, would manipulate. You don't have to tell, please grow. It's a natural thing to do. Relatedness is the same. We are social animals, evolutionarily wired to be together. That's why reciprocity is very important for us, because we cannot survive without a group. So we have the punishment of kind of isolating people from the social group. We call that prison, which is actually a very severe punishment to expel people from the group. So we want to be together. And autonomy. Another basic need, we want to be in control ourselves and make our own decisions and not be dependent upon all kind of outside forces. So the idea is when your job is meaningful, so you feel that your personal goals correspond to what the organization thinks important, that you can grow in your job, that you work together productively with other people in a good spirit, and that you can make your own decisions. We know from research that this is exactly what is fostering your work engagement. And then when you think about leadership, the challenge is how can leaders promote these deeper underlying basic psychological needs? Because when they do, people will grow and people will develop and people will actually show higher levels of engagement. So here we go. By inspiring a leader, connecting people, the work that people do to the bigger picture, to the bigger goal, by enthusiasm, making you more enthusiastic about plans and ideas, you fulfill the need for meaning. You're meaningful because you contribute to the common goal. By strengthening workers, by challenging them, by delegating tasks and responsibilities, you actually foster their growth and their development, the need for development. And by connecting, by having people collaborate, by managing conflicts, by building a team, you foster the need for relatedness. And finally, by empowering, by recognizing ownership, by recognizing voice and the importance of voice in your work, you're stimulating the need for autonomy. So in short, when leaders engage, strengthen, connect, and empower, they will have a positive effect of these basic psychological needs, which in turn will have an effect on engagement. Okay, that's exactly what we found. We did a lot of studies, but this is the kind of summary. So when you have engaging leadership, you find that indeed, and we found it in Indonesia, we found it in Russia, we found it in Belgium, we found it in the Netherlands, we found it in South Africa. All the way it works. Engaging leadership leads to the satisfaction of his needs, leads to work engagement, and then to positive outcomes. But there is more, because engaged leaders also increase personal resources, because they stimulate, they activate people, and because of that, the level of work engagement is increasing. So you get more self-esteem, you get more self-efficacy, because the leader is actually displaying that kind of behaviors, and also increasing job resources. Because when you do your work well, your leader is probably giving you a more exciting or more challenging job the next time, challenging project, which increases your work engagement, etc. So engaging leadership is influencing work engagement through different kind of pathways. But the bottom line is, of course, that this engaging leadership is a very important driver. And then I come to the outcomes. I don't want to dwell upon that very long because, well, the research is pretty obvious that, well, you can summarize it simply by saying that engagement is good. I mean, it's good for individual workers, for your physical health, even for your heart, because people who are engaged, they have less C-reactive protein, and C-reactive protein is a kind of risk factor for developing cardiovascular disease. It was a Finnish study among 10,000 people. So these are all big studies that show that good physical health, good mental health, quality of sleep. If you sleep well, we did this research with nurses in Japan with these activity trackers at your ankle and at your wrist. And in the morning when the engaged nurses woke up, well, they had slept better, which is, in a way, makes sense, because they recharge their batteries. And when they were burned out, or workaholics, they slept less. And also positive attitudes and behaviors, like personal initiative, this kind of extra role behavior, what this rapid flight attendant, flying rapid attendant, you can also say, was displaying. This is an individual, positive individual outcome as well. But also for organizations. Of course, you have low health and replacement costs. This is a study in the Netherlands. We showed consistently that the more engaged the workers are, the less frequent they actually call in sick. There are also less injuries and hazards. In healthcare, a study among nurses, they make less mistakes. Doctors also make less mistakes. So next time we better have this doctor fill in or your doctor fill in this short engagement questionnaire, and then you know, okay, I should be with this guy or even not. And turnover intention. But also good performance, not only self-reported, also performance as assessed by the supervisor, creativity, safety, all this is positive when you are more engaged. And finally, business outcomes. Financial turnover, this was a study that I did with you see a Greek name, it's a Greek PhD student of mine, and we showed that in fast food restaurants, the financial turnover was higher in shifts that were, on the average, more engaged in shifts that were not. Which makes completely sense. I mean, if you go to a restaurant or a bar and you have an engaged person, then you probably drink more or you give a bigger tip or whatever. So that, but it works. And profitability, which is a recent study of Ben Schneider that actually shows that when people are more engaged in 1 year than the next year, the return on asset of the company is actually higher. I give you, I think, one extra. This is one, I think, very striking experience. It's from Gallup, about 1 million employees, and what they did is they aggregated the level of engagement at the business unit level. And they compared the 25 most engaged business units with the 25 least engaged business units. It's a little bit of a trick because then you forget 50% between and then you get bigger effects. But anyway, the effects are real. So what does this say? This says that compared to the least, the quarter, the 25% least engaged business units, the most engaged business units has 37% less absenteeism, 94%, 49% less safety incidents, less quality defects, more customer satisfaction, more profitability, and more productivity. So this is quite a convincing case that there is a correlation between pretty hard business outcomes at the one hand and the level of engagement of workforce in a business unit on the other hand. So this led, amongst others, to this Harvard Business Review with a typical American smile, these dollars, which is actually claiming, and what is true, that when you invest in engagement, happiness, passion, whatever you might call it, it turns out to be a good investment because you get a return on that investment. Finally, how to increase work engagement. Let's first look at the research. Indeed, there are several ways you can increase work engagement. And it's important to notice here that there are different levels. Well, what you can do is you can do mindfulness. It works. It works. Empirically. So when you have a group of people, you give a mindfulness training, another group you don't. You measure before and after. Both groups, you find in the group that has this mindfulness training that the level of engagement goes up. In the control condition where nothing had happened, the level of engagement remains essentially the same. We also did, was a study in the Netherlands about gratefulness and kindness. We asked people in the morning, okay, today you give 3 acts of kindness or compliments to people or whatever. And in the evening you have to write it down. What did you do? What was the reaction? How did you feel about it? And you do that for 2 weeks. The level of engagement goes up. That's the good news. The bad news is as soon as you stop, the level of engagement goes down again. So, okay, you have to continue to be nice to other people. And you hope that what you reinforce is this kind of reciprocity. So you're nice to one person, and naturally that other person is nice to you. And then as a team, when you're all nice to each other, you improve the performance. But also on the team level, there are some strategies that you can use. Team redesign, for instance, job rotation, job enrichment, that all works to a certain degree, and on the level of the organization. So leadership development in the direction of engaging leadership is working as well. But if you look at the total number of well-designed studies, then it is not so much actually. So in a meta-analysis of Knight, they found only 14 studies that met the highest methodological standards that are really, really very, very good. And they indeed found that there was a positive relationship. It was small, but it was positive. And usually psychology effects are small and positive. So if you hope for huge kind of effects, then you shouldn't be in the psychology business because it's so complex that you are very happy that you have a positive effect at all. And it is. So what I'm saying is, yes, there are evidence-based particular interventions at individual, team, and organizational level that you can do in order to improve engagement from a scientific point of view. This is something completely new. It has not yet been published, but I thought it might be interesting for you to know. PhD student of mine is working on an intervention program for increasing engaging leadership. And it's a program that is actually 6 training days, 2 face-to-face sessions with each leader, and there are peer consultation sessions where leaders come together with a facilitator. And we had a design where we had 13 managers following that training program, and 39 not. And we also included their team members, and we have measurements before and after. And what is interesting is that those managers that followed that course, in the teams of those managers, sickness absence reduced with 5%. Initially before it was 7%, 3.7 after, and after another 2 months, 2%. Which means that when you train managers to be an engaging leader, that the level of sickness absence seems to drop. Also, the team performance went up. There was a particular key performance indicator. This was done in the big electronic firms, And the key performance indicator for them that was important was the percentage of orders booked on time. And it was initially 87%, then it rose to 92%, and after another 6 months even to 97%. And actually 90% was kind of benchmark. So they were very satisfied with it. Meaning that when you train engaging leaders, you might also have a positive effect on key performance indicators, such as orders booked on time. So, conclusion, it seems to work. It still has to be published. Maybe when we send the paper in, and the editor says complete trash, and you should do it all over with your program. But I don't expect that. I think this is a very good start of it. And then finally, I want to conclude with a practical example of how this works in practice. Because on the one hand, you have, of course, the evidence-based practice. But as I showed, there is not so much evidence. There are not 100 studies. You cannot pick some interventions off the shelf and say, okay, I'm 100% sure it works, and you implement it and everybody is happy. That's not how it works, because as you all know, reality is very complex. So I'm also involved myself in a commercial business that I actually have with my son, which is a very nice thing to do. And we do this kind of project in organizations where we help organizations to increase their engagement, to decrease their burnout, and we follow this circle. I mean, this is nothing new. You all know it. Formulate a target, which is decreasing engagement, or decreasing burnout, increasing engagement. You design a project team, and you communicate, and you go through all the phases. And I now give you a small hint about how that works in practice. This is the case example of a Dutch hotel chain that had 22 hotels, 1,000 employees, and they had core values, respect, entrepreneurship, passion, here the engagement comes in, passion, style, it was a higher level hotel chain, and customer orientation, of course, it's the hospitality industry. So these were the things that they thought were very important. And what we did is we had an online questionnaire, which you see here. People fill in the questionnaire, and all these different blocks, as you saw there, are actually represented. This is a demo, so this is not the real version. And then each and every worker who fills out this questionnaire gets individualized feedback and can also see how he or she scores compared to a national benchmark. And in the feedback, you can also customize. So for instance, when work-life balance is very poor, you can say, okay, you have a poor work-life balance, but you can go to that website, or you can sign up for that workshop that we offer, etc., etc. So this is the online platform that generates the basic information that is used in the process of intervention. That was that phase. And then what we found in this hotel was, yes, there were strong points, sort of low work-home conflict, which was a little bit strange to me, because as you know, when you work in a hotel, you have all kinds of shifts, and you think, well, maybe people have a problem combining that, but perhaps there's a selection effect. When you go to a hotel, you know before that it happens. Low emotional demands, except in Amsterdam, there are a lot of drunk British tourists that were kind of behaving very badly, and that was a kind of emotional demands, but that was only in Amsterdam, and Holland is more than Amsterdam. And job resources, there was a lot of social support, team atmosphere was great, role clarity, etc. So you see, this was the positive. The negative, the weak point was there was work overload, so they had to do a lot of time. They had a lot of work in a short period of time. There was a high pace of work. Also, there were lacking job resources, like teams were not so working effectively together. Teams were not, team crafting means that you are, that there's a process referring to the distribution of tasks, where everybody gets a task or an assignment that is close to what you want and what you can. So you kind of negotiate that. That was not there. Fair pay, adequate tools, etc. So these weak points were actually the target of what we were doing. And the actions we're taking is there was a renewing of the HR cycle. So there was a past performance kind of thing, a performance appraisal, and they introduced a system of a feed forward, and made a talent card, making an inventory of all kind of talents that the people have. For instance, that's the way to how to spot this rapid flight attendant. It's a particular talent, and leaders very often, organizations very often don't know what kind of talents people have. They had a new training curriculum because they did not match with the needs, the training needs of the persons. They had site visits and lunchtime roundtables in order to facilitate the communication between the top management and the hotels. New communication channels like town hall meetings, etc. Also directed to communications and improvement of ICT systems. So this is actually what they've done at the general level of the whole organization. In addition to that, each and every of these 22 hotels also did specific things. But of course, that's too much detail to present now. And what the outcome after 1 year, the engagement increased with 4%. It's not so much, but the level of engagement was already pretty high. So the higher it is, and this is also a little bit a trick because or problematic issue. Companies who do this kind of interventions, they are already open to it, and usually having more engaged people than companies that you know that probably should benefit more from it, but they don't engage in this kind of intervention. So they had already a high level of engagement, but still it increased. Burnout decreased, satisfaction increased, organization commitment increased, turnover intention decreased, and effectiveness increased. So it's all positive, and that makes me more, let's say, it's not a mixed picture, saying this is going up, this is going down. It's all going up in the same direction, not very high, but it is still. And what also appeared that positive changes, people felt more recognized, they had less problems with tools, the pay was more fair. I don't know where that came from actually, because we didn't change so much, but the perception of pay was better, maybe as a result of the communication, I don't know. Organizational justice, possibilities for learning and development, career, they all were positive. And negative changes, still the pace of work, there was more interpersonal conflict, more work-home conflict this time, and user skills. So you see in practice what happens is some things turn out to be positive, others turn out also to be negative, and sometimes we don't know exactly what that means. But we were able to kind of, at least intuitively, to connect the actions that they did. For instance, renewing the HR cycle, which means when you do that, then you probably increase recognition and career perspectives of people. And that's what we found. When you have a new curriculum introduced, then the possibilities for learning and development will increase. And that's exactly what happened. So they changed the curriculum, and we found after a year that there was more career perspective and more possibilities for learning and development. These site visits and lunch round tables, they actually led to more recognition, to feeling of more justice, because the management of the hotel was explaining procedures, answering questions of people, so that it became more clear how the system worked and how just it was. There were also new communication channels, open town hall meetings, posters, etc., which means more recognition and justice. And of course, when you improve ICT systems, you hope that it also materializes, and it did after 1 year. So you see that the questionnaire that we used, the procedure was quite sensitive in detecting meaningful changes that could be linked to levels of engagement. Okay, my final conclusions. Work engagement is a specific type of well-being. It's not workaholism, it's of course not burnout, it's also different and importantly different from job satisfaction. It differs in a meaningful way across countries. I didn't talk about Japan. Japan is the country that had the lowest by far, so we find meaningful differences. It's related to different kind of job demands and job resources, and it's quite consistent because most of the time the same demands, the same personal and job resources emerge. It has positive effects for individuals, but also for organizations. It can be increased through individual, team, and organizational interventions. And potentially, this is my basic idea, it can close the gap between organizational health psychology, which is more about health, sickness absence, and HR, which is more about performance, motivation, And the concept of work engagement is, on the one hand, it has to do with health, feeling healthy, not feeling burnout. On the other hand, it has also to do with motivation, intrinsic motivation and performance. So it's a concept that, therefore, I believe is very, very important. And I want to conclude with this, because I have learned that when you give a presentation, you always should end with something that, well, people can walk out and next day they can start a new life. And this is the golden rules that I could give you. It's based on evidence that when you use your strengths, adopt a healthy lifestyle, etc., you will probably even more engaged than you are already now. And with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And of course, if you have some questions, I'm not sure if you allow me to answer that now or we do it later in the panel. But anyway, thank you very much.